I've known Robert for a long time. I used to bring my classes down to Dallas for probably the last 35 years, and he gave us tours all over the place, and we appreciate what he has done for our classes, but we also appreciate what he has done for the John F. Kennedy assassination community. Robert Groden has been researching the assassination of President John F. Kennedy since 1964 and is considered a leading critic of the Warren Commission. Groden has assembled the most photographic and film evidence on the case. He has also investigated the medical evidence and personally interviewed most of the medical professionals present that day. In 1975, and some of you will remember this, Groden showed the Zapruder film live on national TV, Good Night America, ABC TV. As a result, he was invited to address the United States House of Representatives to present the case for conspiracy via photographic and other evidence. 2 days later, a resolution to reopen the investigation was introduced by Representative Thomas N. Downing of Virginia. This led to the creation of the House Select Committee to investigate assassinations. Groden was the staff photographer consultant for the life of the committee. He authored the dissenting opinion report for the HSCA photographic panel. He has consulted with other investigations since then. Groden has written 8 books on the assassination. He has consulted on numerous documentaries over the years. He worked with Oliver Stone on JFK. Groden continues to investigate the assassination, and he feels that although it may be too late for justice, it is never too late for the truth. I'm going to introduce Robert and his wife, Janet. They're both going to help each other speak about this presentation. So please welcome Robert Groden and his wife, Janet. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Folks, thank you so much for coming. David, thank you for doing this. This has been really terrific. It's great to see it this time of the year.
It's a little closer for you, Robert.
Really closer?
Yeah, if you get a little closer, we can turn this down.
Okay. How's that? You can move closer.
I'm fine, I'm loud.
Okay.
Yeah, just get as close as you can.
Folks, most of you, if you know me, you know of me, it's because of the photographic work on the assassination. I've written 8 books on the case, and the latest book, it's called JFK Absolute Proof. It has 1,000 photographs in it, colored throughout. We'll talk about this some other time, maybe later on. What we're here to do today is to talk about this book. The book is by Bruce Bell. It's called My Father Killed President John F. Kennedy. The book is just now becoming available. It's a terrific book. And what it's about essentially is Bruce's is what he lived through when he was 11 years old with his father, who he says was one of the assassins of President Kennedy. And he presents a very convincing story. There are 2 areas of this. Part 1 is what he himself experienced, what his father told him. Those are the 2 areas of the case. On what he knew himself, what he lived through at the time, which goes into much detail in the book. That's part 1. But part 2 is what his father told him, which we cannot prove, obviously. But it's what he lived through. So we are telling the story about what he did. I did not write this book. I wrote the introduction. I did a lot of the research on it for the last 20 years. And I wrote the notes on the back as well. Janet and I have been working on this for the last 2 years now, trying to find what additional materials we can, and we've come up with quite a bit. Sweetheart?
Well, the one thing, I'm pretty loud. Can you all hear me? Okay. You don't have to worry. I'm loud. I can hit the back of the church. One of the things I wanted to say is kind of a disclaimer before we start. before everybody starts, texting and going crazy and saying, oh my goodness, Groden thinks he knows who shot the president. That's not what the case is here. What the case is here is that this is what Bruce's father told him. We cannot no more substantiate that his dad pulled a trigger than the man in the moon. But we wanted to bring this out because we feel at this point in time there's really no smoking gun that somebody's going to release a document and come out with. We believe that we are really in the middle of a rather large jigsaw puzzle, many pieces of which have been put together today or presented today. And we think that it's important to put all these things out there for all of us who research so that maybe somebody can look at this piece and come up with that piece and go, oh, that fits together. Maybe eventually we will get the whole puzzle solved. But we're not going to do it by just judging an entire story by the fact that Dad may not have been completely honest about everything he said, okay? And you'll see, I think, why we feel this way as we go along. Robert, do you want to start with meeting Bruce?
Sure. About 20 years ago, I was contacted by Bruce Bell, and he told me he had a story to tell about the assassination. He had read my book, High Treason, and said it was the most accurate book he'd ever read on the case, but he had a lot of personal things he wanted to add. Bruce's father was Oris Bell, and Oris was the owner of a company called U.S. Sonics in Dallas, about four blocks away from Dealey Plaza in actuality. It's just off Industrial Boulevard, or what was in those days Industrial Boulevard. Now it's Riverfront. U.S. Sonics was a government contractor for the aerospace and defense industries, as well as this being a CIA front. It's located on Park House Street, just off of Industrial Boulevard. This is where U.S. Sonics used to be. It is no longer there. The building is there. But what's wild about the building is everything that you see here on this panoramic shot is all U.S., where U.S. Sonics was. They had a cleaning room for engine and airplane parts and things of that nature. And the amount of work that they did was almost exclusively for the government. These are some of the major members of the company. Charles Lundquist was the de facto owner of the company. Bruce Bell, his father, Oris, was the president. General Charles Bourne was the vice president. Edwin Nesbitt was the secretary. Clarence Bentley bought out the others eventually.
Bought out by the others.
Was bought out by them. These were the main people. Their individual connections to the government were really kind of strong, especially with the stuff that we've been talking about today.
Notice also that there's a dollar sign over there. I've put them in order of how much they had invested in the company. So we have this Charles Lundquist, who I'd be surprised if nobody's heard of him once I talk about him a little bit more. But, are you okay? But he was the money guy. He invested the most. Then we have Oris Bell, the next amount. Then a general, Charles Bourne, who we'll talk about in a moment. Then Edwin Nesbitt, who was an attorney in Dallas, and Clarence Bentley, who I believe once things progressed and he was not interested, he may have been bought out by the others. That's the impression I'm getting. Okay, want me to go through them? Mm-hmm. Okay. Oris was in the U.S. Army in World War II. Interestingly, somebody mentioned Italy and things happening in Italy earlier. He spent a lot of time in southern Italy due to an injury during World War II. I mean, like months and months. He learned their culture, he learned the language, and he was exposed to the mafia there. which is interesting later on. He also spent time with the mafia at the Del Mar racetrack in California later on, and I think we know some of the characters who have spent time there. He was introduced to the KKK by his father. His father, Emmett Bell, lived in in Texas, all of his life, and he was really into the KKK. Just as an aside, he happens to be buried in the same cemetery as Lee Oswald, which is neither here nor there, just an interesting little tidbit. After the war, Orris worked in the lumber industry, owning a milling company of some kind in Idaho. Okay, that did not work out after a couple of years, and when that didn't work out, he's employed by U.S. Chemical in California. And that is where he met Charles Lundquist, remember, #1 money person, all right? Lundquist had ties to General Curtis LeMay, and Lundquist had ties to the CIA's covert projects. U.S. Sonics was very busy all throughout the time it existed, which wasn't really that long. They were incorporated in 1961, but during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the place was hopping. From what I understand from Bruce, his dad didn't come home for 5 days during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He spent it all there. Now, at U.S. Sonics, Orris, you have to remember, has contacts in the military, in the defense industry from his work at U.S. Chemical, in the aerospace industry from his work at U.S. Chemical in California. He's got ties to the mafia, and he is able to work with the KKK. He is kind of one of those people, in New York we call it the guy who can schmooze, okay? He's the guy you can put in the room with all of these people, and he can talk to them, each one of them, as if he's their best friend, and he can get them together and get them to kind of agree on things, okay? Another thing as an aside, he's an experienced marksman. There's a lot of information about Orris shooting. He organized hunting trips for these particular aerospace businessmen in Colorado every year, all kinds of things like that. Next, the next person is Air Force General Charles Bourne. Now, Charles Bourne was kind of what LeMay was in the Pacific. He was kind of that counterpart in Europe, all right? He was in the Army and the Air Force in World War II. He was in Italy during 1943 and 44, where so was Orris, but, you know, so were a lot of other people, but that's just, you know, could be. He supposedly retired from the military in 1955, but from what Bruce says, you know, it was kind of like somebody retiring from the CIA. He also did work with the CIA, so keep that in mind. And he did a lot of work with Texas Instruments in Texas. He was the liaison to and the spokesman for Curtis LeMay within this little group of people, okay? And he had his own office at U.S. Sonics. Now, when you go into that big building at U.S. Sonics, straight in front of you, there's a hallway and there's a conference room. When you go in the back and to the left, there are some rather large offices, and Bruce said the first one you come to there at the end of the hall is his. It was a big office. Bruce says that this building was built for them to do CIA-type projects. It was always a CIA front. And from looking at the way the building is put together, it makes sense. So that's our friend General Bourne. Charles Lundquist. This is the person who's the number 4 investor. And he's got an MBA from Harvard. He's also a World War II vet. He was the president of U.S. Chemical Milling Corporation in California, okay? And no, I'm sorry, he was the number 1, not the number 4, the number 1 person who was the investor. Under his leadership as chairman and president. By 1960, the U.S. Chemical Milling Corporation had grown to be the world's largest producer of chemically milled parts for the missile and aircraft industry. He was helping extensively in our nation's missile and space programs. This is in a biography of him. So he basically is the money man. He goes back and forth between California and Texas. The next person we have is the secretary of the corporation, and that is Edwin Nesbitt. Edwin Nesbitt is an attorney in Dallas. He was previously, for a short amount of time, an ADA. He had a law degree. He was a little older than the others. He had a law degree from UT from 1937. In World War II, he served as a major in the U.S. Army stateside. How many people do you know who were stateside in World War II? The only other place he went was Puerto Rico. And lo and behold, that's another place that our friend General Bourne spent time, if you look at his military record. Other people in his immediate family were also in the legal field. He had a brother-in-law who was a judge. He had brothers who were lawyers. The whole family had to do with legal things in Dallas. And anything that this corporation did, US Sonics, that had anything to do with legalities or any paperwork, his name's on it. And so is his wife's sometimes, I guess because they had nobody else and they needed a name. Next we have Clarence Bentley. Clarence received his law degree from Baylor. Now we have a big difference here. Baylor University, especially back then, was very much a Baptist school. So that makes me think a little differently about him. He spent 3 years as an ADA, an assistant district attorney in Dallas, and he kind of got into this because he joined the law firm of Schultz and Nesbitt, Nesbitt being the previous person, in Dallas. Later on, he served as the president of the Dallas Bar Association. Now, he is the person who was bought out rather quickly. Around the time, Bruce says, that they started talking about the assassination. General Bourne made a speech, and it was in 1962, I believe the fall of 62. Am I correct?
I believe so, yeah.
I think so. Okay. Take it away.
Bruce's story is somewhat unique. Growing up as a young man, he was taken under the wing of his father. He was of the four kids. He was the one who's the most favorite of the father, of Boris. What we're showing,
Sorry.
yeah, what we're showing here now is the house that they lived in at the time of the assassination. Next. This is the school, the elementary school that he went to. He had a pretty reasonable career, nothing very outstanding. But he, let's see, according to what we've got here on the notes, is he begins missing school a lot. And the reason why he was missing it is because his father was taking him to meetings, places like the Carousel Club with Jack Ruby, and a shooting range with other people. Notes from his mother were accepted without question by the school, saying that he was ill, that he needed to stay home, had temperature, stomach aches, stuff like that. Next. This is Meadowbrook Junior High School. This is where Bruce really started to grow up and started living life occurrences. He was in grade 7 in the 1963-64 school year, the school year during the assassination time. Most classes were held in his homeroom. Bruce became friends with his teacher, became very close with his teacher. 20 years ago, he explained to me that he had a crush on her. So anyway, they got very, very close. And he would stay after class, and he would help her out with things like cleaning the erasers and things of that nature. And she took an interest in him and was hoping that his school career would take off. She began to question his many absences and ask him about it, but, she didn't get too close with that. He missed a lot of days because he was with his father for most of those days.
2-3 times a week.
She notices that there were changes in Bruce's character and his interests, things of that nature. And that was a very, very strange situation for him because he got away with it. He wasn't playing hooky per se, but yet he was. On the day of the assassination, November 22nd, 1963, at home in the morning, when Bruce got up, Oris was already gone. As the family woke up, Oris was gone. They're expected to act as if this is a normal day in all their school occurrences, whatever. His mother worked at home, so she didn't have to worry about explaining anything to anyone. Bruce and his older sisters are worried that their father might be killed. Worried, they were aware that he was getting involved in this. Bruce is the only one who knew the extreme details. At school, Bruce had a tough morning, unable to concentrate, worried about his father. He was clock watching as the news said the parade was progressing toward Dealey Plaza at noon, and then on to the Trade Mart. Incoming announcement of Kennedy's shooting and possible death was announced over the PA system, and when Bruce heard this, his reaction was incredible. You've heard about kids getting up screaming and applauding when they heard it. Well, in Texas, that was pretty common. But Bruce's response really stood out. He got up and cheered, and his teacher was shocked and had him sit down and said that you would talk with him later. Bruce's reaction was different from the rest of the classmates. They were relatively shocked at what was going on, perhaps not at their age being aware of how important this was worldwide. Bruce's reaction, let's see here, Bruce's teacher's last words. You remember the last words?
She said to him, Bruce, because he wouldn't tell her, she said, what is going on with you? Talk to me, what's happening? That was not like you. Why did you react that way? And Bruce just kind of put her off, and she said, look, everybody's parents are picking them up, or you're going home. Go right home, but I will talk to you when we come back to school on Monday.
However, November 22nd, 1963 was Bruce's last day at school. Oris pulled him out of school completely, and as far as we know, there was no explanation to the school, but that's what happened on November 22nd, 63. Next.
Can you read those?
I can't read those, just a moment. Go ahead.
Okay. Now this is what Oris has told Bruce, okay? So we're just repeating what Bruce was told. Oris states that he and a man named Charles Lyon were behind the picket fence with other CIA people. They drove there in a white van, and they stashed rifles in there and took off afterwards. He says that they left the area and went to a designated location in downtown Dallas, where people were supposed to meet afterwards. He told Bruce that he fired the fatal shot and that Lyon fired the throat shot. Now, again, this could be that, yeah, maybe he did. On the other hand, maybe he's just trying to show off for his son, because the more I learn about this man, that's the kind of thing he would do. It would not surprise me for him to have just said that, okay? He said there was another person shooting in the Texas School Book Depository to set Lee up, okay? Lee was set up from the get-go on this whole thing. You have to remember that Lee just got the job there 5 weeks ahead of time, all right? And it was supposedly good old Ruth Payne talking to her little coffee clutch neighbors and saying, oh, who knows where somebody might get a job, knowing that the lady down the street's brother just got one. he had been there, Buell Frazier had been there 2 weeks before Oswald. So it's not like she didn't know that. But anyway, he went in, and most of you here, or many of you, are teachers. Would you like to tell me why the Texas School Book Depository was hiring people to fill beginning of the year textbook orders in October? Why would you need additional help then? That makes absolutely no sense. But he was hired, so there we go. Bruce's dad, Oris, also said there was a person in the Daltex building specifically who was shooting from behind. He says that Tippit was supposed to get rid of Lee and begged off. He was supposed to drop Lee, and Tippit said no at the last minute, so he had to be, quote, taken care of. He says that Tippit was shot by Roscoe White, who was also in the plaza, which I've heard from someone else as well. He also said that Dealey Plaza was full of CIA people. If you looked around, you'd be surprised, he said, how many people were there that were CIA people.
One thing is that Bruce has told me from the beginning, for the last 20 years actually, that Oswald had nothing to do with the shooting, but originally they were trying to bring him in and setting him up as a patsy. He was not on the 6th floor as he was supposed to be. He was on the 2nd floor talking to a woman named Geraldine Reed. So he had an airtight alibi. That's why they had to kill him. They couldn't take a chance on him having a trial where other witnesses might speak out.
Okay, can you see that?
Okay.
Aftermath.
Aftermath for Oris. Oris left the area and did not return for 5 months into the Dallas area. He was in California for all that time.
With Lundquist.
With Lundquist, yes. When he returned, there was a talk in the Dallas-Fort Worth.
Just in that area. There were, you know, people were talking a lot about the assassination and who could be involved.
The family moved away from the area. U.S. Sonics closed.
Within a year.
Within a year of the assassination. Oris spent his last years in Chicago, traveling back and forth to Texas, still working with companies that did aerospace and defense contracts. He also, by the way, said that he had an interaction with high-level military people as well. The conspirators took a trip around the world by boat. It didn't work out, and they were sent back home, or they came back home.
A Lundquist yacht.
Yeah, Lundquist had a rather large yacht. This was their celebratory situation. Oris continued to do contract work for the CIA on his own for several years thereafter. This is a ranch which is in Midlothian, Texas. We live in Midlothian, Texas, and we drove out there a while back, and I found that although Lyons himself is now dead, the road that this is on is Lyons Street, and it's a pretty large house, and it's a massive property. It's a farm-type property. He purchased the land following the assassination. Clearly, he spent a lot of money to get it.
It's huge out there. It is huge, even now. And there's a development along the edge of it, so you know some of it's been sold off. But the land area is huge. It's at the edge of Waxahachie there.
He lived the rest of his life on the farm in Waxahachie until he passed away. He was described in his obituary as a pillar of the community.
Yet Oris says he was a shooter.
Yeah, yet
But we don't know.
he apparently went into a mode of just blending in, and he died in 2018, just a few years back, and we never got the chance to talk to him, to ask him, although I don't know what we could say, by the way, did you shoot the president? And,
Yeah. There's a conversation starter. Guess
Yeah.
what I heard about you?
Anyway, those are the people involved in the assassination and what happened with them. Next. You want to do this, Sweetie?
Well, you probably know it better, but
Okay. As Bruce aged, he changed his attitude about what had happened. When he began to think about talking of what he knew. There will be another book after this one, a volume 2, dealing with the personal stuff that happened to him after the assassination. I know that story, but I'm not really allowed to talk about it yet. The book is not completed. He was sent to a psychiatrist in Dallas by his father, who was not really a doctor at all. The doctor, what he was sent for, he was being set up and brainwashed. The brainwashing took place at a mental facility in South Texas, which we cannot find any notation
well, it's
that
not
it
there
still,
anymore.
that it still
Yeah,
exists.
but
So
it was.
he was given shock treatments, as were several other people. Gary may talk about that in a little while. We'll see. But a lot of people involved with other people that were connected to the assassination were sent to the same sort of situation, given electroshock therapy. He had his papers and photographs stolen. He had everything that he was working with, all of his working papers were in his car. And his car was broken into and everything was stolen. All of his papers, all the photographs, everything.
Nothing else, not the car, not the stereo, just the paper.
Just the paperwork, yeah. He was sent to jail 20 years ago on trumped-up charges. Never got a trial. Never had a trial, and he's still in jail to this day, in prison.
He was let out, the cancer.
Oh yeah, well, I was about to get to that here. He was let out some years ago on parole and developed cancer. Well, he had to leave the state to find a specialist for treatment and operation. And because he did that, they said he violated his parole. They threw him back in jail, where he's been up until this very day. Now he has cancer again. It's gotten worse. It's quite serious, and he's trying to get out on a compassionate release. But after 20 years, he's lost his entire adult life. All I can say is that the story is believable. It's well written, and it's an interesting story. There are a lot of situations like this where we get clues as to who may have been involved in this on one level or another. And Gary's going to talk about one in a little while. But the thing is, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We always assume that these may be true, and maybe that's the clue we need to solving the case. We just don't know. I've been working on the photographic evidence I mentioned before for right now it's been like 57 years. And in my new book, I've published 2,000 photographs. I'm sorry. No,
1,000.
I'm trying.
He's exaggerating.
Yeah, well, I was going to say is between this and the previous two books, altogether I've published 2,200 pictures, a little over 2,000. This has 1,000, and about 70% have never been published before. So we'll have this for you to look at if anyone's interested. We also have Bruce's book, too. We have several of those. Bruce's book is normally $20, $22. We're selling it for $20, no sales tax, just straight, if you're interested. It's an interesting read. It gives you a new perspective on how people were involved and what their emotional feelings were in relationship to the assassination. As mentioned several times already today, those who were involved in killing the president felt that he was betraying the country, that he was soft on communism. And that's what happened here too. The aerospace center, the aerospace people were involved in this politically and financially. They felt that if the president did what he wanted to do and end the Vietnam War, they would lose their way of making a very, very good income for themselves. What? Oh yeah, this is interesting too. You may be aware that a young man named Buell Wesley Frazier, who was a teenager at the time, drove Lee Oswald to work that day. He had driven him to work quite a few times in the 5 weeks prior to the assassination. But Buell did a lecture for the Texas School Book Depository's oral history just a few months ago. And in this, he mentioned something he had never mentioned before because he was afraid to. And what he had mentioned is that he saw a man leave the grassy knoll heading for a car that was parked on the Elm Street extension, and saw the man throw a rifle into the trunk of the car. Buell was definitely afraid that the guy would see him and
Well, he did see him.
yeah, and he did. He was right. He did see him. But Buell turned around and headed back toward the book depository, and that's the last time he ever saw the man. But he described what he saw as a man throwing the rifle into the car, and that the man was very, very well dressed, and was wearing a dark hat,
A Stetson?
a Stetson hat.
No, not a Stetson.
No.
What's the other hat that?
Fedora.
A fedora. Thank
yeah.
you. A fedora that everyone wore.
Anyway, we feel this might very well have been Oris Bell that he saw. The man who he described matches the description of Bell.
If you, I'm sorry.
We had, as I said, I've been working on this book with him for 20 years, and Janet and I, for the last 2 years, have been spending a lot of time trying to track things down. At the gravesite, at Oris's gravesite, on his gravestone is an attacking eagle, like the CIA insignia, and this is it. It's really weird. I don't know of anybody else who has something like this, but he's there. He's buried in Fort Worth, and we've gone around. We've gone to different places, his schools, his house, like that. I've traveled around with Bruce Bautoon. It's about 20 years ago. Went to California. We went several places in California, in Fort Worth, and like that. And everything he said has proven to be true. Nothing that he said he was involved with has not been verified by what we see. We don't know that his father was telling him the whole truth. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. I suggest if you're interested in the story, get the book, read it, and think for yourself what you believe, what you think is true. We do believe it. And I guess that's about it. Does anybody have any questions about either this or about anything else relating to the photographic evidence?
Robert, one of the first two slides you showed, you mentioned that his family, or the son and his sisters feared that he would be killed. What, because he worked at this aerospace?
No, because Bruce had been taken back and forth. And we don't want to tell you the entire book, but, you know, Bruce had been taken back and forth and was there the day that General Bourne made the speech to the assembled group that said, yes, we're going to go through with this, we have to get rid of this man. So he knew what they were doing, and he was taken to these meetings. Now, if you talk to people like Chris Milligan or Channa Willis or St. John Hunt, who had parents who were in the CIA, they will all tell you that they take the kids with them. Channa used to go with Daddy to the airport, and he'd have things chained to his wrist. St. John would go places, you know, he's told the story of him having stuff from the bank stuck down behind his coat and his pants because he went with Daddy. You know, these things happen. Bruce was taken, you know, as who's going to take, nobody questions you when your kid's there. And he was grooming Bruce. Bruce was his oldest son, you know? So they knew, and apparently the two older sisters just knew that he was going to have something to do with it right then. They didn't know ahead of time, and the younger kids, there were 3 younger kids, they didn't know either. Actually, 2 alive then, one was
I know we're going to have a few more questions, but before we go on, would you give a round of applause for these 2 people, Robert and Janet Groden? Also, let's open things up, and then I'm going to turn it back over to David. But any questions on this? Because guys, you know what you're coming across here at this small little thing that we're putting on here. You're coming across some new information and some old information that is new, and we're not done yet. We are not done yet. We got Shannon Willis coming on later on. We got Gary Shaw coming up here, and we also have Ed Tatro. There's a lot of information coming on, guys. So any questions before we get out of here for Robert and Janet? Let me see if I see any hands.
Just curious, did he say anything about James Files that claims to be the mafia guy that was involved in?
All right, the question was, did he say anything about James Files, the mafia guy that said he was involved in this?
No, he did not mention Files. The story about Files has been a matter of question for a lot of us through the last several years. Files, of course, claims that he shot President Kennedy from the knoll. I think probably greater than 70% don't believe this story. Janet has come out with a feeling which I totally agree with. If he's telling the truth about shooting the president, he should be executed. If he's lying about it, he should be in jail for the rest of his life for obstructing justice. In any case, it's an interesting point one way or the other. Bruce did not mention anything about Ora saying anything about James Files being on the knoll.
And James, you should know also that on the day of the memoriam, November 22nd, while things are going on the grassy knoll and people are saying prayers and playing taps, James Files is behind the fence because I'm on the knoll and I can see him. And he's taking pictures with people behind the fence on the knoll. So that kind of told me pretty much what I needed to know about James Files.
And signing autographs, too.
Yes, I forgot that. That's true. One other thing that just real quick, I don't think we really got into the depth of how much Buell said. Buell was so distinct in describing this person, okay? You have to know Buell and know that Buell is kind of a clothes horse kind of person. If you mention fashion, he's there. He can tell you, all kinds of things. But he said that this man had a very expensive suit, much more expensive than the new suit that Lavelle had on that day, which was brand new. He said the man had hand-tailored shirts. He said the shoes were very, very fine leather, probably foreign. I mean, he went on all these little details. We called him because we were watching it because he had asked us to watch it, and I was like, oh my God, Robert, back it up. We were freaking out. And asked him some more questions because I thought actually originally that it might have been somebody else. So I was asking kind of cute questions. Nope, this, and this. And it didn't occur to me. And then I was reading in here to look at this. And Bruce, let me see if I can find it. I can't see it here now. I had it marked before. But Bruce describes his father. And I talked to Bruce recently on the phone as well. And he said, oh yeah, he used to get his shoes handmade in Italy. Oh yeah, he had handmade shirts. He had a fedora. And I had asked, what's his name, Buell. I said, do you remember anything about the face or anything? He said, mostly I remember he had a fedora on and he had black hair. And I said, Bruce, what color hair did your dad have? Black. And when I read Bruce's description in here, and this was done, he wrote that part of this 20 years ago, I was just amazed. I really think I don't know, like I say, I can't say he shot anybody, but I do think he was walking around that area with a rifle. Just saying.
Anyway, we do believe the story. If I wouldn't have spent 20 years with this guy doing the research with them and traveling around the country to try to find witnesses, if I didn't believe it, and I do. It may be true, it may not be true. We believe it is. It's worth considering. Gary's going to talk about Roscoe White after dinner, and that's another situation. Here comes somebody who's talking about his father being involved in the assassination, and that could very well be true as well. How long ago do we spend time together with this, Gary? I mean, it's incredible. You know, there are possibilities that there are witnesses, children of people who were involved in this that are telling the story now, this late in the game. You mentioned before. I have said now for the last 40, 45 years, it may be too late for justice in this case, but it's never too late for the truth. I mean that sincerely. We deserve the truth. We need the truth. We can't go on building a structure on top of a foundation of lies.
Another question.
Another
Dave's
question?
got a couple Zoom questions.
Okay.
All right, go ahead, David.
All right, this one comes from Tina Valen, and it says, did Bruce ever see rifles with silencers?
Did you what?
All right, the question is, did Bruce ever see rifles with silencers, since the organization or corporation, Psionics or whatever?
U.S. Sonics,
Yeah.
no.
No,
he
he
didn't
never
mention
mentioned
it.
anything about a silencer, but he did mention specific rifles. They're all mentioned in the book as well.
Okay, we got one more question. It says, are there any photographs in and around the plaza which, on being looked at anew, might reveal people which would support the scenario as described?
There are pictures that seem to show people on the knoll. Work that still needs to be done, but can't be, because I'll show you. When I found stuff on the grassy knoll in some photographs and whatever, I went to UPITN, United Press International Television News, and asked for access again to the Knicks film. I found out in my blow-ups of the Knicks film that it shows somebody on the grassy knoll and in what appears to be a gun flash. But the thing is this, the color balances, the density balances I did on the film when I enlarged to 35 millimeter was to go for natural skin tone of the president and the most revealing density there for what we needed to see. I wasn't considering anything on the knoll, so the knoll, which is in shadow, has something called D-max, which is the heavy density, the blacks, and it all blocks in, so you can't see very much detail there. But where we could possibly see somebody shooting on the knoll, I wanted to lighten it up and do the whole thing all over again to allow us to see more detail there.
From the original.
UPI
which
would
they had.
not allow me to touch it, period. They could have the story of the century there, and they wouldn't do it.
Okay, before we get out of here, again, can we get a round of applause for these two, Robert Groden and his wife, Janet? Thank you guys very much. I'm going to turn it over to David Denton. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Guys, appreciate it. Great job. Good job.
Thank you.
Janet.
Get out of the way here.